Welcome back. Hour number 2 of Talkline on the Metro News Radio Network in and around the great state of West Virginia. Hoppy Kirchhoff with you. Kay Murray, our producer. Tyler Mertens handling the video stream. State Board of Education yesterday approved a new disciplinary policy that for the first time protects students from bullying based on gender and sexual orientation. The new policy lays out acceptable behavior of students and lists 12 possible reasons why students are bullied. They include mental, physical, or developmental disability, race, color, religion, gender, ancestry, national origin, socioeconomic status, academic status, physical appearance, gender identity, and sexual orientation. For the first time, it articulates the behaviors we expect students to have, said State School Superintendent Dr. Jeria Marple. Marple said the policy sends a message to students, teachers, and parents. Everyone must be involved to maintain proper student behavior. To talk about this, two different perspectives. Jeremy Dice is with the West Virginia Family Policy Council. Jeremy, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Hoppy. I'm well.
Good. Bradley Milam is Executive Director of Fairness West Virginia. Bradley, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm well.
Thanks for coming on. Bradley, why are you so excited about this? Why do you think this is needed?
Sure. We are so happy that this actually passed yesterday, and we believe it's a great step forward in making sure that all students in West Virginia are protected. This policies like this are touted by organizations like the American Federation of Teachers, National Education Association, the National PTA, simply because policies like this make sure that all students, even those who are most vulnerable to being bullied, are protected. And in Policy 4373, the language is such that the policy is all-inclusive, so that the characteristics listed there do not establish limitations to the policy. It says that any kind of bullying that's reasonably perceived as being motivated by any actual or perceived differentiating characteristic. And it also makes sure to say at the end that other characteristic is included. So it guarantees that students are protected on the basis of race or sexual orientation, for example, but they don't necessarily have to be in any one of those categories to be protected. So we're very pleased by this stronger policy.
Look, and I understand the necessity to empower teachers in schools to stop bullying in whatever form it exists. Why is it necessary, though, to identify, even though you say it's secondary, identify particular groups? I mean, whether you're bullying the gay kid or the short kid or the kid who gets D's or the kid who gets A's. I mean, so why is it necessary to identify particular groups, in your opinion?
Sure. So we know that based on research and surveys of thousands of students and teachers from across the nation, that when policies are generic, or in other words, they say all students should be protected, and they don't list certain characteristics of students who are most vulnerable to bullying, those policies are about as effective as no policy at all in protecting students who are vulnerable to bullying from bullying. And so, I think the same idea that's present in the Civil Rights Act, for example, holds true here, that in theory, when we say that all people deserve the same protections, in reality, certain people are often denied those same protections simply because of who they are.
Jeremy Dice with the West... Go ahead. I'm sorry, Bradley.
So, just to finish my thought. So in this policy, it makes sure that all students are protected, literally all of them, if they fit into any one of these categories or not.
Jeremy Dice with the West Virginia Family Policy Council. What's your beef with the policy?
Well, the rules governing bullying in this state need to apply equally and fairly to all students. Schools are not permitted to censor speech simply because someone subjectively defines it to be, quote, offensive or somehow outside the boundaries of socially appropriate behavior, as this policy now gives the right to school officials to do. So students should not have to censor their own beliefs, nor should they be afraid of sharing the gospel with other students who hold themselves out to be homosexual. We're concerned that this policy, it's not going to be a matter of if, but when students will have their constitutional rights censored under this policy.
Jeremy, how do you mean? Give me a real example of what you're talking about.
Sure. I mean, hey, look, in Texas, an honor student there simply told his fellow student, hey, I believe that homosexual behavior is morally wrong. He found himself kicked out of the honors program, suspended from school, and it took him a lawsuit to get back into class. The rules governing bullying in that state, as well as in this state, need to apply equally and fairly to all students. Schools can't prohibit speech simply because one person deems it to be, quote-unquote, offensive. That's precisely why the First Amendment was put into place.
Bradley, do you see this as drifting over into First Amendment protections, whereas, as Jeremy's example, one student says to another, you're gay and homosexuality is a sin and you ought to think about changing your life or repenting? Is that, in your opinion, harassment or bullying, or does that step into First Amendment territory?
So, in terms of this policy, I think that State Board of Education President Wade Linger made it clear in his op-ed that he released a couple of weeks ago that this policy establishes no special protections to any student. And in addition, I think that the board also made clear, as well as the counsel to the Department of Education, that free speech protections for students that were in place before are still in place today. That student in Texas ended up being protected. His right to free speech was protected by the courts. And yet again, the courts have, and case law shows that any kind of speech that is disruptive to an educational environment is something that is prohibited in school. But nevertheless, students are able to express their own opinions in a non-curricular setting.
Jeremy,
so, I don't think that the concerns about free speech really apply to this policy.
Jeremy, your response to that?
All you got to do is go to look on page 19 of the policy, where it tells us that the schools have unfettered permission to limit offensive speech that is beyond the boundaries of socially appropriate behavior. That's what it says in the policy. That is going to be applied against students. It's not a matter of if, it's going to be when. This does not apply equally. It does not apply fairly to all students. Look, and I want to be very clear talking to parents and students who are out there right now. They're going to face this policy coming into school next year. If parents or students are told by school officials that their loving message that says that the opposite of homosexuality is holiness and not heterosexuality, if that is told that to be outside the boundaries of socially appropriate behavior, then they should immediately call the Family Policy Council of West Virginia. We want to defend you and have your right to say that under the Constitution. But still, it should not resort to a lawsuit for a student to be able to express their sincerely held religious beliefs as protected under the First Amendment.
I hadn't gotten to this speech part. I mean, that's an interesting aspect of this. Read that line to me again, Jeremy.
It says that schools, I don't have I can grab it here in a second, but it says that the offensive, it's on page 19, that schools may limit offensive speech that is beyond here's where I'm blanking on the exact language, beyond the duty of the schools to teach the boundaries of socially appropriate behavior. That's a remarkable thing. And look, that's not applying equally. That's not applying fairly. That's allowing one teacher, one administrator, one janitor for that matter, to say that's offensive speech. Well, hey, that's the thing that the First Amendment was put into place. And I find it very interesting that at last month's hearing before the Subcommittee B of the Judiciary Committee in the House, the head of the ACLU said, look, when religious beliefs promote intolerant behavior, not only can that speech be censored, it should be censored under policies like this. So you have the ACLU themselves saying that this policy will not equally and fairly apply to all students.
Bradley?
If it disrupts the educational environment in a classroom, the teacher should have the authority to say this is disruptive of the educational environment in this classroom, or it is targeting a certain student, and that is not permitted in a school. And I actually have the statement here. It says schools may limit vulgar or offensive speech inconsistent with the school's responsibility for teaching students the boundaries of socially appropriate behavior. It essentially says that any kind of speech that is vulgar or offensive is not permitted in a school. And that, I think that any teacher would agree that before this policy was in place, that probably would have been the kind of beliefs that they would have had about how they can regulate their classroom. Educational environment.
We digress a little bit on this, but it's a really interesting point that because we know from U.S. Supreme Court decisions, in fact, there's a West Virginia case that goes back a number of years, that First Amendment rights do not stop at the schoolhouse door. Now, schools have a right to maintain order. You can't stand up in the classroom and say, I'm exercising free speech and go on and you can't be disruptive. But you do have protected speech, and it goes back to, I think, kids wearing armbands to protest war and those kinds of things. So I got to give that some thought. That's interesting.
Look, Javi, I can highlight this for Lori, exactly right. And first of all, let's not see the fact that all students were protected under a bullying policy today and a year ago. It's not like somehow we've just magically flipped the switch and some who were not are now protected. All students have been protected under bullying. Now we just amended as to what that means and given further authority, unfettered authority, to unaccountable school officials to determine what is and is not offensive speech. But look, I was before the committee last month in the legislature, and I was one of like 6 speakers, all of whom went before me got to speak. And as soon as I said something that one delegate deemed to be offensive speech, I was cut off and before the committee. And so I was not allowed to go on with my prepared remarks. And I had Delegate Danny Wells ask me if my personal beliefs were contributing to the discrimination of gay kids in school. And I had asked him what he thought my personal beliefs were, because I knew what they were, but I wondered what he thought that they might have been. And he asked me if those thoughts were perhaps what the Bible teaches, that gay kids should be killed, which is not what Scripture teaches all of us. So the point is here, Poppy, that this is a real thing. When someone doesn't agree with certain statements, and they deem that to be offensive, not vulgar, not violent, not any of these things, just when they deem them to be offensive or beyond the boundaries of socially appropriate behavior, that's not applying equally, and it's not applying fairly. So to Mr. Milam, I've got to ask, what are the boundaries of socially appropriate behavior here? What is it that he gets to decide, or do I get to decide what those boundaries are? Do school officials get to decide that? What's the definition of sexual orientation?
Brad, we want to take a shot at that?
Sure. I think the easy response is that it does apply equally to everyone. And, the anti-bullying law that West Virginia has right now says, and it's true, it says that it protects all students from bullying. But in reality, all research that we have shown shows that that policy actually doesn't hold true in protecting all students equally. And so this policy simply provides stronger protections to all students in West Virginia. And I think that the discussion about free speech protections will apply equally to all students as well.
Brad, go ahead, Jeremy.
I'm sorry. It's clear that they protect all students so long as your speech is not offensive. When your speech becomes offensive to one person in the school or to Mr. Milam or to Mr. Crabtree at the ACLU, then this policy will not apply equally and it will not apply fairly. But I want to reiterate to those parents who are listening, if your student finds himself or herself in trouble or some school official has told them that their loving message to the homosexual community that homosexuality is not, the opposite of that is not heterosexuality but holiness, if they find that to be deemed outside the boundaries of socially appropriate behavior, give us a call. This policy needs to apply equally and fairly to all students, and it will not.
Jeremy Dice, West Virginia Family Policy Council, Bradley Milam, Executive Director of Fairness West Virginia. Thank you both for coming on.
Thank you, Hoppy.
Thank you, Hoppy.
Thank you. Good talking to you. Take a break and be back. 1-800-765-8255.